So last week we talked about the first need, which is pleasure. Tonight we're going to the second need, which is food. And some of your ears perked up last week when I mentioned that we're going to talk about food. I've used this before. On the right is a healthy person. So high energy at the top where we call the performance zone. But a healthy person performs, they serve, they do their job, they work with their children, etc. But they reach a point where they say, now I need some downtime, I need to recover. And they know how to meet their needs so that they're able to go back and perform again. And they can do that for the rest of their life. Perform, downtime, take care of self, perform. The difference with complex trauma is it's on the left. And you're in survival mode. And what survival mode means is you are always on guard. You can't relax. You can't stop and meet your needs and have downtime. So in complex trauma, you push yourself until you burn out. And that's the body's only way of recovering. Now, why I tell you that is a lot of people from complex trauma who have pushed themselves till they burn out come into recovery still operating that way. So they do recovery, push. They haven't learned how to meet their needs, so they just push themselves till they burn out. And usually that is a relapse. And so to get recovery well, you have to stop doing that, and you have to start living on the right side, and that means learning how to meet your needs in healthy ways. And that's what this series is about. Food, as you are aware, food and water, most basic physical need that we have necessary to stay alive. And our culture has done probably the greatest at giving us lots of information about healthy food choices, all of that kind of healthy eating stuff. So I don't want to do any of that tonight because you can get that anywhere. I want to take it deeper. And so what is interesting to me is that our society, who has more information about food than probably hardly any other nation in the world, and yet we have huge issues around food. So it's like all this information doesn't seem to be helping people. There's all kinds of money being spent on dieting, on exercise programs, on liposuction, on stomach surgeries, etc., etc. I came across this by Global News. There's no other industry in the world that makes so much money but fails so many people as the food industry or the diet industry. So that it goes on to say this: the weight loss sectors have been growing by about 6% a year since the 1980s. In other words, dieting programs, exercise programs, all of those things, they're making more money each year by about 6%. But at the same time, obesity rates have continued to climb steadily in North America. And it was estimated in 2013 in Canada that Canadians spent $7 billion on dieting programs. And in the United States, they spent $65 billion. And so that's why the first quote says, there's no other industry that makes so much money that has failed so many people. So I go, what's our culture missing? It seems to have all the information. It tells you how to eat healthy, all your healthy food, and we ignore a lot of it, or we do it for a little while, quit. Do it again, quit. And so what is going on? And so that's why I wanted to talk about this, because I don't think our culture has factored in how complex trauma changes people's relationship to food. And so I want to look at that now, and I also want to just add some extra challenges that everybody in Canada faces just because we live in Canada. And so I hope that you'll begin to realize that there are deeper reasons for why we eat the way we eat other than what our society is telling us. And unless we deal with those deeper issues, our society can give us tons of information, but it's not going to make a lasting difference. So let me begin. I think, and it's my opinion, and there's lots of evidence now, I think, to support it. Dr. Gabor Mate talks a lot about it, but he and I would say that the majority of eating disorders are connected to complex trauma. So when a person comes to me and says, will React help me with my eating disorders? I say it sure will. Because what comes out of complex trauma is an unhealthy relationship to food for most people. So we have anorexia, bulimia, and then binge eating and purging. The second thing that happens in our culture, and it's a cultural thing, is we have put so much emphasis, especially for women, on their body and how they look. And so if you have any fat, then you should feel that you're not desirable, that nobody would want you. And it puts tremendous pressure on women, which has led to constant dieting, trying to get the perfect body. And we swim in a culture that thinks that way. We watch TV that constantly projects that, and it does influence people. And it's a big concern of mine of how it's affecting young girls coming up in our culture today. So we got a cultural stuff going on, but some of you with complex trauma or just in your family, you had family dynamics that weren't healthy in relationship to food. So you had a mom, let's say, who every time you turn around was starting a new diet. And every January she was starting a new diet and a new exercise program. And you just grew up with that kind of thinking all the time. And then another piece that comes out of complex trauma is that shame piece. And so shame says, I don't like myself. So in order to get good feelings about myself, I need others to like me. And then what happens with that is if I'm going to get others to like me, I got to have a good body. So that emphasis can come out of shame. Or for others with shame, I need to control my eating perfectly, or I'm down on myself. I beat myself up because I'm failing, I'm a loser, I can't do anything right. So shame can affect our relationship with food and how we think about it. And then for some of you, you got a cultural stuff, you got a family stuff, but then you went to school and you were made fun of or bullied because you were a bit pudgy or heavy or overweight. And you were teased about that and called names. And it hurt you so much. And you were kind of put in the outcast group because of your weight. So those are just some of the things that you have probably grown up with in your culture. Now let me go back to the complex trauma world within the family. I've had many clients say to me that they eat their emotions. So when they're feeling stress, they eat. When they're feeling anxiety, they eat. When they're depressed, they eat. And they go back in their thinking and they remember as a little child when they were crying and grandma didn't like their crying. It made grandma uncomfortable. So she said, have a cookie. That'll make you feel better. And that started a pattern that if you're sad, you eat and that'll make you feel better. So that's what we mean by eating your emotions. So what you can see right there is that what you were doing with food was trying to meet an emotional need. Now, food was designed to meet physical needs, but what just happened is the wires got crossed and you're using food now to try to meet an emotional need. And what happens with that is it seems to work but it doesn't. It leaves you empty and a bit heavier afterwards. Many people, as they realize kind of the emptiness that they feel, they may not know why, they just have always felt that way. There's been a hole in their heart, and they haven't understood that their basic needs haven't been met. But what they have found is when they eat, it seems to fill the emptiness. And so they begin to eat whenever they feel any emptiness. So again, trying to meet a need, an emotional need, a soul need with food. Then another part of our culture, and I was thinking about this week. Do you realize that if you go to AA, there's food, coffee, and food? If you come to Finding Freedom, there's coffee and food. If you go to a social event, there's food. So we are a culture where social events, there's an unwritten rule that you have to have food. And so you're bombarded with it as a regular thing when you go out with friends or social events. Another thing that can happen with food in a complex trauma is this. Children who are in complex trauma where their life is chaos, they feel that everything's out of control. And they try to gain control, but they can't because the big people in their life aren't cooperating. And so what they begin to do is look for things that they can control that will cause them to feel some stability and some control and will take away some of the fear that they're feeling. And so some find food is something they can control. And so they become very rigid around food as a way of trying to regain control. The flip side of that, some kids grow up with super controlling parents, where parents want to control everything about them, what they do, who they see, etc., etc. So they look for ways where they can rebel and give mom and dad the finger, and mom and dad can't do a thing about it. And food is one way they can rebel. And so that, to them, actually gives them pleasure at a subconscious level because now they can make mom and dad upset, but mom and dad can't control what they do or don't eat. Next one, some children who didn't get much validation, they got validation from grandma because they ate so much food. And grandma just felt great. There wasn't a thing left on the plate. And she might have said, I love having you come to visit because you eat everything and you eat so much. It just makes me so happy. And you go, I love that validation. So now everywhere I go, I'm going to eat everybody under the table. And that will be my banner of pride at how much I can eat, or I never leave any leftovers. Okay, next one. Some of you might have grown up in a family where mom and dad portioned out your plate. So you didn't get to choose how much to put on your plate. They portioned it out and gave it to you and said you're not leaving till it's all gone. And so you ate beyond feeling full. You had to keep eating because mom and dad wouldn't allow any leftovers. And so some of you had that. Okay, back to society. We live in a culture where there's food that's constantly available, lots of snacks. Do you realize, and I've thought of this in some of the wacky moments in my brain, do you realize that there could only be one food in the world, brown rice? That could be it. But we have thousands and thousands of types of foods and ways of serving foods and spices for foods that appeal to all kinds of different tastes. So there's an endless variety of opportunity that can be super, super tasty. And so that presents a problem when you live in a prosperous country where there's tons of food available and very tasty treats. You just live with that. And the next one. Some people have become disciplined in their eating, not just because it gets them validation at home, but because in their church, it makes them feel they're more spiritual than other people. And so they become self-righteous about how slim their body is, and they judge everybody that's a bit overweight. Some of you might have grown up with that. Okay, now I want to come to food addiction. So there is such a thing, we call it a process addiction. It's when you take an activity that's based on a human need and you make it something you keep doing until it becomes a problem. And so food addiction for many people is they're using food to numb pain. So they're eating their emotions. They're using food to give pleasure to an empty life. They're using food to help them cope. And so that sets them up for becoming addicted to it because food wasn't designed to serve those purposes. But it does give instant gratification. It does numb pain. It does make you feel a little better. And it does help you cope for the moment. But the long-term consequences are where the trouble begins to come. Okay? So the next thing with that to understand is food, especially eating with people, but food plus people creates all the chemicals of connection. And so when you eat food, it releases dopamine in the brain. It releases the endorphins that cause you to feel good and connected. And so food serves the purpose of giving you the same feelings as healthy connection was designed to do. And so that's where it can become an addiction. Now, if you do have a food addiction, what you've probably realized is that there could be many, many different things that trigger subconsciously or consciously the desire to eat. So it could be stress, depression, anxiety, sadness, boredom, discontent, on and on. And so part of recovery from food addiction is learning what triggers you to want to use food to meet an emotional need. Okay? I say to people with food addictions all the time, you actually have a more challenging job in recovery than people who are drug addicts or alcoholics, because with food addiction, food is something you still have to have. A drug addict and an alcoholic, they can have total abstinence. But with food, you can't have total abstinence or you die from starvation. And so that makes food addiction recovery extra challenging because you still got to eat. You just got to learn to eat for the right reasons and to control that. Another thing that I say to people is, in our culture today, food addiction, exercise addiction are the socially acceptable addictions. And so you can have everybody say, stop drug addiction, stop alcoholism, but you don't hear anybody saying, stop having people become food addicts or exercise addicts. It's a culture where that is considered acceptable behavior for many, many people. Okay? So what I have tried to emphasize, and I want to say it again, food addiction is all about getting your wires crossed. It is about using food to meet an emotional need. So unless you learn to meet those emotional needs in healthy ways, you're going to struggle with your food addiction recovery, because that still will be where your brain goes when you're feeling those needs that you haven't learned how to meet in a healthy way. Now, let me give you one more piece around this. One of the things I say to clients that come in with drug addiction and alcohol addiction is be prepared. You're stopping drug addiction and alcohol addiction, but you're letting your emotions thaw out and you're becoming aware of your needs, but you're not able to meet all of your needs in a healthy way right away. So you're going to live in early recovery with some unmet needs. Your brain doesn't like unmet needs. And your brain is going to start to say, I gotta get rid of that emptiness or that uncomfortable feeling. Okay, what am I going to do? Can't go to drugs, can't go to alcohol. Oh, what else could I do? Well, let's start a food addiction. And you cross addict. And do you realize that in early recovery, studies have been done, most addicts in early recovery, especially residential programs, gain at least a pound a week because food becomes their new addiction. And then they get in a relationship and sex, and then that takes over and becomes their next new addiction. So the danger in recovery from drugs and alcohol is that you can easily cross into making food your new way to medicate, your new way to feel better, your new way to try to meet those emotional needs. And that is a very challenging thing. So let me say this again. We live in a culture that is focusing on symptoms only. So they're saying you're overweight, stop eating so much, go on a diet. They're not asking, why are you not eating well in the first place? They're making it sound like you just don't have good self-will, self-discipline, and if you just did this or you knew more about calories and stuff like that, it would fix the symptom. If you come from complex trauma, you know that our society is basically putting Band-Aids on the problems that are symptoms. So what I want you to understand is that a person with complex trauma, they shut down emotionally because it's dangerous to feel. It makes you weak to have feelings. They shut down their conscience, but those things still operate subconsciously. You just disconnect from them. And so subconsciously, you still feel emptiness. Subconsciously, you feel dead inside. Subconsciously, you feel anxiety and depression, and your brain is working to solve that. And when it finds food, it says, this seems to help, let's do more. And now you overdo food. And that is the beginning of a food addiction. So, if you want help with your food problems, don't just do Band-Aids. Start to understand why you've been eating and having an unhealthy relationship with food. Next thing that I want you to see is our culture is spending all kinds of money trying to help us meet physical needs. So here's how to get in shape. Here's how to eat healthy. Our culture is really doing a very poor job at teaching people how to meet emotional needs. And that's where the problem is. And so what we're going to get to in meeting these needs in healthy ways, these 12 needs, is learning to meet those needs, those deep emotional needs. Because until you do, addiction will be the brain's way of trying to fix those problems. So that is a big thing. Okay, so as long as you are disconnected from emotions and that world down there, you will probably not eat in healthy ways. You will continue to struggle. So that's where we have to begin, but we're going to get there in just a minute. Okay, let me just back up from that. Okay, so that's complex trauma, how it messes up relationships to food. Let's back up and say, okay, what's the purpose of food anyways? Don't know if you think about those kind of things. I do. Number one, food is the gasoline that keeps this physical engine going. It is the energy source to keep us alive physically. But I think there's actually a second use for food I think as you look through history, every culture used food as a way to bring people together to help create social connectedness. So if you go to any culture and there's like a Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter, people came together to celebrate. And so guess what they did in those times? Everybody overate, but just for those times. And the focus was not just food, the focus was connecting. And so I think food still can play a role in bringing people together. Okay? Next thing I want you to think about is this. So we as human beings, we have physical needs, emotional needs, intellectual needs, relational needs, spiritual needs. So we're multifaceted beings. I think that what we learn about meeting physical needs teaches us about meeting emotional needs, intellectual needs, spiritual needs, relational needs. So let me explain. Eating and drinking are ongoing needs. So a baby isn't born, you feed them once and they're good for life. You got to eat several times a day. So what does that tell us? You got to keep feeding your emotional world. You got to keep feeding your spiritual world. You got to keep feeding your intellectual world. You don't just say, okay, I got my, my emotional fix or my spiritual fix, I'm good. All the other needs follow the same pattern as physical needs, eating. So there has to be ongoing. So ESR, emotional, spiritual, relational. And I think that's just an important thing that we need reminders every time we sit down to eat to say, have I been feeding my emotions? Have I been feeding my intellect, my spirit? Those become just little signs saying, don't forget, you just don't have physical needs, you got other needs as well. Second, our physical needs have a built-in mechanism to tell us when they need to be met. So if you're hungry or you don't have enough food, you feel hunger. If you don't have enough water, you feel thirst. It's a built-in mechanism that alerts us to that need. Do you realize that you have an emotional thirst mechanism? You have a relational thirst mechanism, a spiritual thirst mechanism. You have a longing. You have a deep drive, desire. And so I think, again, physical needs are designed to say, pay attention to your emotional hunger, your spiritual hunger, your intellectual hunger, because they're there if you stop and listen. And so I would encourage you, as part of developing tools, to say, okay, food, part of its purpose is to teach me about my other needs. So I'm feeling hungry right now. Let's stop and do an inventory. Am I hungry emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, and relationally? And what do I do if I sense and realize I'm hungry in those areas? Okay? Third thing, you can mistrain the hunger mechanism. You can distort it. Okay? So what's the design is when you are in need of food, you have hunger, but you realize if you overeat and overeat and overeat, that the next time you feel hunger, it isn't because you're hungry, it's because your stomach is shrinking. You're not truly hungry, your stomach is just reacting to shrinking. So what you've done by overeating, you've mistrained the hunger mechanism. Okay? I don't know if any of you know what pica is or pica. They usually refer to it with pregnant ladies, where you eat mud or you eat drywall or you eat chalk, and all of a sudden you've got a hunger for stuff that has no nutritional value. And what it is saying is, and so it's not just with people who are pregnant, But what they're finding is people with eating disorders, that pica is now listed as an eating disorder where people will start eating dirt and all of that stuff as part of what fills them up. They've mistrained their hunger. So we can mistrain our emotional hunger system, our spiritual hunger system, and we can be eating junk food, thinking it satisfies, and it's making us sicker. Okay, and then I tell people all the time about emotional anorexia. So what happens with physical anorexia is if you ignore the hunger impulse long enough, you will soon not feel it anymore. So every time you feel hunger, you ignore it, you push it down, and pretty soon you can go months without eating and you don't feel any cravings for food. That is physical anorexia. You can do the same with your emotions. You can ignore your emotions to the point where you no longer feel your emotions. So what happens in people with food eating disorders, in getting healthy, you got to retrain your hunger mechanism. And so what you do in recovery is you retrain your emotional hunger mechanism, your spiritual hunger mechanism, so that it gets to be healthy again. And it takes time to retrain that. Number 4, we are not naturally discerning when it comes to food. So a child, everything goes in their mouth. Could be dog poop, could be a paper clip, it just all goes in their mouth. And then once they find sugar and sweets, that's their preference over anything healthy. So we have to train a child to eat healthy. And so we have to train ourselves in recovery, not just to eat healthy physically, but to have a healthy emotional diet, a healthy intellectual diet, spiritual diet, etc. And so those are all things we can learn from the physical need part, the food part. Okay, let me go to practical suggestions. And like I said at the beginning, I'm not going to go and give you kind of all of the research the society gives us around healthy food choices and healthy eatings and different types of things. You can find all of that very easily. But let me say this up front. Don't start a diet if you're not dealing with your underlying issues. You're setting yourself up to fail. So some of those underlying issues are your shame stuff, your body image stuff. So that's where you have to begin if you're going to deal properly with the food. So your eating has become a symptom of those deeper issues. Deal with those issues. So with that, as you deal with the issues, now you get, like any addict, what are my triggers? Is stress a trigger? Is anxiety a trigger? So you become more self-aware. And as you become aware, so let's say you realize as soon as I'm feeling anxious or stressed, I start eating, or as soon as I'm feeling bored, I start eating, or as soon as I get home from work tonight or at night and I start relaxing, I start snacking. So you go, all of those things are triggers. Now, what safety nets do I need to put in place so I don't give in to those triggers? So you're building your recovery plan. So you're dealing with the underlying stuff on one hand, but you're also dealing with here and now and putting plans in place to help you in those triggering times. Okay. Other practical things I've picked up over the years in dealing with people coming out of addiction. Number 1, it's important if you want to get eating under control to begin to have some menus. So you don't just get home from work and say, I wonder what I feel like eating tonight. Oh, okay, I'll get a bag of potato chips. You have a menu for each night and you start to do that. And that takes discipline, but if you're able to do it, it's a great thing. importance of a shopping list. Don't go shopping and go, wonder what I feel like, and pick up whatever comes to your mind. That's a problem. And I always say this to clients. Be careful about taking your little children shopping with you for groceries. Because a lot of parents in recovery feel guilt. And their children will say, Mommy, Mommy, can I buy this? And you don't want to say no because your child might cry and be mad at you and not like you. So you let your child basically do half the shopping. And do you want to know, I read a study. If you go next time to Superstore or Safeway, guess where they put all the children's things? The bottom shelf. Right at their eye level. Because they're trying to get the children to influence the decisions of the parent when it comes to shopping. So I encourage people, write your shopping list out ahead of time, hopefully based on the menus that you've laid out, and stick to it when you go shopping. And then, obvious one, don't go shopping when you're hungry. It tends to backfire. And be careful how much you eat out. And like I said, hunger pangs don't necessarily mean that you're truly hungry. So begin to learn all of that. So that's what I wanted to say around this food issue. I think what I've seen is this. I don't deal with many addicts from drugs and alcohol who don't also have food problems. And so at some point in their recovery, this becomes an issue for them. And it becomes an issue that can be such a difficult struggle, it leads to getting constantly down on themselves. And they might think it's okay to do when you're young and your metabolism's high, but once you hit 40 and your metabolism starts slowing down, all of a sudden all of those things that you used to do and got away with start coming to haunt you. And you begin to say, man, I've got problems. And now they want to start dealing with it. So I hope this just gets you started on the right track for developing a healthy relationship with food.